ZAC is weird. I'm not really sure how to describe my feelings on this champion. Even in a roster as diverse and crazy as League, something about this guy has just always sort of stood out as strange to me. Like he came from a completely different game or franchise. Maybe that's just me, but in a roster of what is now actually over 150 characters, ZAC manages to stand out. Or maybe not, given that he's barely ever acknowledged in any capacity. Even back during his initial release in 2013, ZAC never got much fanfare. This was around the point at which Riot started putting a bit more effort into their characters beyond just generic archetype, but ZAC still never got much beyond his initial bio and color story. Granted, I think that was more or less to be expected, since champions rarely got much beyond that anyways, at least at the time. But on that note, let's back up and talk about ZAC's bio. ZAC's name is actually an anagram for those who didn't know. It stands for Zonite Amorphous Combatant. Originally, he was a bioweapon created by two scientists working for an unknown weapons manufacturer in Zon. After learning that their creation was more sapient than originally expected, though, they decided to steal away with their creation in the hopes of raising him as their own. This, as you can imagine, did not please their employer. Eventually, members of the lab tracked the scientist couple down and abducted them, both to lure ZAC into a trap as well as to extract the formula needed to recreate him. Unfortunately for them, the people from the lab didn't account for ZAC still possessing tremendous combat abilities despite being raised with a conscience. He managed to defeat and subdue his parents' captors, brought them both back home safe, and swore to use his powers to defend the weak and innocent. ZAC, in his conception, shares a lot of parallels with Superman. While Kal-El wasn't made to be a weapon, he was raised by two kind and loving parents that weren't even related to him, who instilled him with a strong moral compass. Both characters possess tremendous strength far above the average human, but use it primarily for the benefit of others. Even when fighting against an opponent, neither of these heroes likes to go all out unless absolutely necessary. Though his design definitely makes him look intimidating, ZAC's characterization is more like a gentle giant. Even when he gets mad, and even though he's willing to bust some heads to keep the peace, you never get the feeling that ZAC wants to hurt anyone. At least, not more than he must. He is effectively Zon's very own superhero. Before Echo and Zeri were introduced, at least. And then they made him into Batman for no reason. To be honest, I'm not even entirely sure when it happened myself. Sometime shortly after the Zon Piltover retcon, I think. Just out of nowhere, someone at Riot edited ZAC's bio to make him angstier and more tragic, which is something that I don't think anyone was ever asking for. For starters, ZAC went from being a deliberately engineered creature to the result of random chemicals coalescing under Zon. Okay, seriously, I am so beyond tired of League's insistence that things can just happen because reasons. Look, I can suspend my disbelief, and I don't need everything in a fantasy setting to be explained to me in excruciating detail. But come on, guys. You can't just explain everything away by saying that random energies and or chemicals mix. You might as well just turn the entire population of Zon into freaking mutants, because the air is filled with toxic chemicals down there. That's how it works, right? Ranting aside, the rest of the bio continues to play out differently than it did before. This pool of ooze became something of a local legend in Zon because it would occasionally toss back trash that was tossed into it, and so it was eventually found and drained by unknown alchemists for study. Eventually, two scientists in this group's employ began to realize that the goo possessed some manner of sentience, perhaps even sapience, and questioned the morality of the experiments being performed on it. They also learned that the experiments were being funded by some crime boss called Saito Takeda, who basically wanted to turn the goo into a soldier. He called this research the Zon Amorphous Combatant Project. The scientists continued their work for a time, trying to undermine Takeda's efforts by teaching ZAC morality and compassion, and eventually decided to just run away with the living ooze. As before, they hid away and raised ZAC in secret, though they were eventually found by Takeda's men. This time, though, ZAC wasn't around to protect them, so the scientists died and ZAC went into a mad rage, killing the Chemtech soldiers responsible. In the aftermath, ZAC swore to try and uphold the values taught to him by his adopted parents, lending his aid to the sick and suffering in Zon's lower levels. However, because ZAC randomly has empath powers now, sometimes the concentrated negative emotions of the city get to him, and he turns into a vigilante hunting down and beating up bad guys. He might also potentially go on rampages now and then, like what happened when he destroyed basically an entire city block while avenging his parents. The ending sentence of his bio makes it really vague as to why exactly his appearance may be cause for trepidation. So, alright, this bio does do a few things that I find interesting. We get an established named villain for one thing, even if Takeda never really crops up outside of ZAC's bio. I guess it's also kind of neat that we hear more about the general process of ZAC's adopted parents raising him, going so far as to have them undermine the other scientists' efforts to weaponize him. I just hate that ZAC was found rather than made. Putting aside how convoluted it is that he's now just a random mix of chemicals, how exactly did Takeda know that ZAC could be molded into a soldier exactly? Presumably that was the reason why he extracted ZAC from this underground pool of sludge in the first place, but at that point no one really understood anything about how the goo operated, let alone if it was even truly alive. And again, there's also just the needless tragedy of it all. Like, really, what did killing ZAC's parents actually accomplish? What did any of this accomplish in the long run? Even after rebooting ZAC's bio, they still haven't done anything with him. He got a short story showing us a bit more about how his empath powers can affect him, but that's about it. Also, seriously, can we talk about the empath thing? Why was this done exactly? I really don't get why they suddenly decided to have ZAC be able to sense the feelings of other creatures. Is that also just a result of the random chemicals that mixed to create him? Of course, this is all ignoring the biggest elephant in the room, that being Seraphine. While Seraphine's lore has always been a bit of an iffy situation due to her marketing gimmick and the Brackern conundrum, her lore and character are much more focused around being an empath than ZAC's. ZAC's psychic abilities just feel sort of tacked on, a random power he has that plays no role in his design or gameplay, unless you want to count the antenna, I guess. In essence, what Riot has done is take a character with a perfectly serviceable backstory who could have been fleshed out as he was, and reinvented him to be edgier and more tragic for no real reason, right before they immediately went back to ignoring him. Ultimately, that is the biggest issue with ZAC. He's one of the most neglected characters in the story, which is baffling given that he is, again, meant to be Zon's very own superhero. But I guess because monsters aren't as appealing as humans, Echo and Zeri now get to fill that role, and ZAC is just slinking around in pipes and sewers unless Riot decides they can use him for something. But what do you all think? What do you think of the changes to ZAC's bio? Leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I'll see you all next time.